So Resident Evil 9, aka Resident Evil Requiem, is supposed to be coming out next year for the PS5, Xbox Series X, and PC. I'm not exactly sure whether or not it's going to be on the Switch 2. It hasn't been confirmed for the Switch 2, which makes sense considering the fact that the game's probably been in development for years and the Switch 2 was announced and unveiled like months ago before its official release, which was back in like June. So I don't know. I feel like if Resident Evil 9 does really good next year, we'll eventually see it on the Switch 2 later down the line. But as of right now, it's going to be on current generation game systems like PS5 and Xbox Series X, which is going to be a bummer for those who are just PS4 or Xbox One owners. You have to buy the current gen consoles to play this game. And I don't know, a lot of people are questioning whether or not it's worth it, especially considering the fact that we got a new main protagonist by the name of Grace Ashcroft. And for those who don't know, she's supposed to be the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, who was one of the many playable characters in Resident Evil Outbreak, a game that came out back in the mid 2000s, and like I want to say '04. And apparently Alyssa is supposed to be making a surprise appearance in this game. And I don't know the details about that or anything like that, but I don't know, I do feel like having that connective tissue is something that can definitely help the quality of this game, because like if people don't really connect with Grace, they'll remember Alyssa from one of the older games, and I feel like that'll add to like the whole storytelling element of this game, along with Capcom wanting you to focus more on the gameplay and the features and all that stuff. And in this game, Grace is supposed to be an FBI analyst, and I think in Resident Evil Outbreak, Melissa was, I think she was an investigator for Raccoon City. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, the daughter has a higher rank than the mother does in terms of occupation, but aside from that, can people really connect with Grace Ashcroft? Because I don't feel like people are really going to get into her as much as they did some of the older protagonists like Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine or um, Leon Kennedy. And a lot of people were disappointed when they found out that Jill Valentine wasn't going to be like the main character or anything like that, because a lot of people feel like since Resident Evil 5, she just became an afterthought, and there hasn't been any real follow up with like her story other than I guess reports of like what happened after the whole thing with Wesker. And yeah, I mean, I think it's something that's hard for people to leave behind, but obviously Capcom wants you to focus on like the future and on the here and now. And you look at Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, that was a game that pretty much saved the franchise from just becoming completely irrelevant. A lot of people will tell you it was one of the best installments of the teens decade, even though Ethan Winters, the main character for that game, was someone that people really don't remember. Um, I wouldn't say as fondly, but he's not as popular as like Leon or Chris or any of the other main protagonists. It's one of those things where people feel like Grace might eventually be the female version of that, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if the game does really well on a commercial level in terms of sales. But at the same time, I think Capcom, for the most part, needs to include like older characters, like OGs from the older games and some of the newer installments, because it's something that lapsed fans of the franchise would be happy to see for the most part. And the fact that like the remakes of some of the older games, like Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4, did like really well and were among Capcom's best selling games within the past couple of years shows you how well like the older games did in terms of standing the test of time. And I'm pretty sure that the newer installments that we've gotten like within the past like decade or whatever, you know, it's like they're going to be looked at as classics as well, but probably not to the extent of like the first like 4 games or like, Resident Evils like 2 through 4 or whatever. But but yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly sure whether or not Grace Ashcroft is going to have any like real depth in terms of like character development or anything like that. But I don't know, I do feel that like, the way it looks and, the gameplay and all that stuff, all of it looks impressive. And I honestly feel like next year it's definitely going to be one of those games that end up like being a bestseller on like the PS5, or I can see it selling more on a PS5 than I do like the Xbox Series X, but it's only because it's Resident Evil and it's one of the biggest franchise within the video game industry right now. And it's definitely like Capcom's like best IP right now. And I do feel like just because of that alone, I don't think it really matters whether or not people care that much about Grace Ashcroft, because nowadays you don't really have to have like, like larger than life or, highly relatable characters to have a game sell well. It's just something that people have to be into for the most part. And and yeah, I mean, I feel like Resident Evil 9 is definitely going to be one of those games that people are going to end up talking fondly about like years after it comes out. And I think we're supposed to be getting a new Silent Hill game next year. I think Silent Hill F might be coming out next year. And and I don't know, I can definitely see this game selling more than that. But then again, um, you know, this is like one of the first like brand new like entries within the Silent Hill series that we've seen in quite some time. So who knows? I mean, Silent Hill F could end up being a big deal. But the thing is, Konami hasn't really been as consistent with putting out mainline entries within the Silent Hill franchise, and Capcom, for the most part, has been pretty consistent with the Resident Evil series. So obviously, it's more popular, and obviously, I expect it to do big numbers when it first come out in next year. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I do feel like the survival horror genre in general is definitely going to make a comeback, and I don't think characters like, or at least the main character has to be someone that has to be like really deep or anything like that for people to connect with them. I honestly feel like the gameplay has to be good. You have to have realism. You have to have twists and turns and elements of surprise within a survival horror game to make people emotionally invested in it. And I feel like Capcom has been really good at that with the Resident Evil franchise for the most part. As far as Silent Hill is concerned and Konami's concerned, they're really good at psychological horror, type of stuff. So I don't know. I feel like obviously like those two games are similar because they're both survival horror, but gameplay wise, they feel uniquely different. But I do feel that Grace Ashcroft as a character, who knows? She might end up being acquired taste. She might be someone that people initially dislike, but then over time they'll grow to like her, or or I don't know, it'll like make people care about Alyssa from Resident Evil Outbreak again, because I feel like Outbreak is a game that really doesn't get talked about as much as it should, and yeah, I mean, maybe like Capcom should probably go back and do like a current generation remake of that. But obviously, they I think there are certain other games that they plan on like remaking like sometime in the future. I think there's like a Resident Evil game from the early 2000s that they plan on remaking, but I don't know until it's officially announced and I see trailers and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I do feel that Grace Ashcroft has the potential to be one of the more memorable female protagonists within the Resident Evil franchise, but I wouldn't necessarily hold my breath on that.